Because if you go too early, you could be seen as exploitive or trying to take advantage of an opportunity. But if you wait too long to start that sales conversation, you could have the money being spent on competitors.
This episode is brought to you by Postal.io, a sales and marketing engagement platform that generates leads, increases sales, and improves customer retention. Learn how you can integrate direct mail and gifting into your existing strategy by visiting Postal.io. Hey there, I'm Bernie Borges, Chief Customer Officer at Vengreso, the leader in digital sales transformation. I'm also the host of this show, the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. On this podcast, I showcase B2B marketers in the trenches, showcasing strategies and tactics that are working for them in their modern marketing journey. Be sure to listen to the end of each conversation for my summary and takeaway, as well as the closing message. And now, here's this week's Modern Marketer. Welcome to episode 289. My guest this week is Adriel Sanchez, CMO at Newsela. Adriel, welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
Delighted to be here, Bernie.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me here today, Adriel. As you know, I always like to begin our conversation with an introduction to your company. Your company is fascinating. I was not aware of your company before we were introduced. And so I have since become fascinated, and I want to share that fascination with my listeners. So let's begin with an introduction. Who is Newsela?
Newsela is basically we provide instructional content to K through 12 schools, primarily in the US, but we do have some international customers. And what we basically do is take content from around the web and from trusted, reliable sources, and we make it ready for use in K through 12 classrooms. So if you have children in K through 12, they may be using Newsela. We've got over 35 million students registered on the platform and around 2.5 million teachers or so. So massive penetration, presence in 90% of US schools. And what makes the content consumed on Newsela really special is that we don't just, number one, it comes from trusted, reliable, vetted sources, but we do some things to the content in order to make it ready for classroom use. One of the things that we do is we rewrite every single piece of content at 5 different reading levels. So in a single class, every student can access the same piece of content at the reading level that's right for them. The second thing that we do is we surround all of the content with instructional supports that make it really, really easy for teachers to embed that content into their lessons. And the third thing that we do is that we attach all of that content to the individual subject-specific, grade-specific standards by state. And in case you're not close to this space, there are over 130,000 of those just in the United States if you look at subject, grade, and state. So through a combination of machine learning, algorithms, and manual intervention, we've been able to make all of those connections.
Wow. Very impressive. Very, very impressive. And one of the things that I remember discussing with you as we prepared for this is the whole concept that, you're a business, you're a for-profit business, but, you're part mission driven as well, really, which is really about providing great educational content for the children in the educational system, as you said, mostly in the US. So how does that play into your role as CMO?
Yeah, precisely. I mean, a lot of companies in the education technology space have come from places or started by people that aren't necessarily from within the scope of education. I think we've been really smart here about building a business that is not our story. Our story is a number of folks who spent a lot of time in education, wanted to build something that could make an amazing impact, that our CEO likes to describe us as a single bottom line company, which is really making education better for as many students and teachers as possible. So from a CMO perspective, it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of like a dream come true. Usually, I mean, in other organizations that I've been at, you kind of have to stretch your thinking a little bit in order to figure out what the purpose and mission and the why of the company is.
Hmm.
Here, the mission is really built in. It's built in from the start. You come to work every day feeling like the work itself is truly rewarding. Like you've made an impact that day, and the whole company feels that way. And it's the type of feedback that we get from our customers and prospects.
Awesome. So, Adriel, 2020 has been an interesting year, to say the least. And you and I are recording this pretty close to the end of the year. And so I invited you on the Modern Marketing Engine podcast to share the story of how Newsela reacted to the pandemic and what you did in the marketplace that was both beneficial to the marketplace and also beneficial to your company. It was a good result. So why don't you kind of tee that up? Let Tell us about how you approached 2020 once the world changed.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story for us. We spent the majority of the latter half of 2019 essentially re architecting our product portfolio. We used to have one product. We launched at the beginning of 2020 with four products. That happened on January 8th. And around mid March, so around 7 or 8 weeks later, obviously we know that the world got turned upside down. And one of the industries that was most affected, one of the areas, was obviously education. So as schools started to just close in mass around the country, we had to really make some decisions on what we were going to do. On the one side, we obviously had a business to support. On the other side, we had a lot of teachers and students out there who were completely unprepared for the shift to remote learning. Districts that were didn't really have any meaningful remote learning plans in place, and were really panicked to find resources to keep
Hmm.
the education going. So we sat back and we said, okay, what could we do? And we like to think of ourselves as having four stakeholders. We have students are a stakeholder, teachers are a stakeholder, education administrators are a stakeholder, and then of course our investors, and by extension Newsela, we are a for-profit business. We are a stakeholder as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
In this situation, we decided to do the right thing for the student and teacher and administrator educator and administration educators above and beyond our own interests, right? So we said, what is the right thing to do for the business? And if we do the right thing, the market will take care of us down the line. So what we did was essentially provide the entire product portfolio for free, and
So,
really,
Adriel, I just want to pause right there. So we
yeah,
don't
sure.
we don't use special effects here on the podcast, right? I want to, but I do want to put an exclamation point on that. You decided to provide the entire platform to students and teachers for free,
Yeah,
and then
so we
you.
decided to give the entire platform away for free to the entire market. No conditions, no questions asked. All you had to do was ask for it. So we knew at the middle of March that we wanted to do the right thing for the market. So what we did was really come up with a three-phased approach um, to our response. The first phase was really making the decision to give away the entire product portfolio free of charge. No conditions. All you had to do was ask for it, and we provide all of the entire product portfolio to your teachers and students free of charge. The second phase would be making sure that folks were actually using the product. It's not good enough to actually provide the product for free. We had to make sure that
Right.
folks were actually using it, getting value out of it. And then, of course, the third phase was at some point we were going to have to think about returning to the sales conversation and how
Okay.
we turn as many of those users of the free version into paying subscribers as possible.
Okay. So once the pandemic hit and you strategically met as a leadership team and you came up with this program, you said it was three phases. The first one was really to make the ready product. You made the decision, make the product ready rather for free and get the word out. So how did you do that? What were some of the things that you did to get the word out and reach the marketplace?
Yeah, so it was interesting. We decided on March 11th to do this. On March 13th, we had created a mechanism for entire school districts to request access for all of their teachers and students in mass with a single, essentially simple form submission. They did have to speak to us, so we did make that connection. So they would fill out a form, and we would have a very brief conversation with them, find a little bit about their district and how many teachers and how to enable them, and figure out a few of the logistics. And from there, we would turn it on for everybody. So the way that we got the message out was pretty straightforward. We had a communication from our CEO that went out to the entire base. We had some social media that went out. I think what was one of the things that was most surprising for us is just how quickly word got around. I
Hmm.
think there was a handful of things that we did, but within the first 7 days of announcing this offer, we had around 15,000 schools that had already signed up for this.
Wow.
Within the first 2 weeks, it was around 30,000 schools. We wound up with, at the end of the program, two-thirds of all US schools had used Newsela in some capacity for their distance learning program.
Wow. And approximately how many schools is that? Two-thirds of U.S. schools is
It's about 90,000 schools. There's about 130,000 schools in the country.
wow. That's impressive. Okay, so you reached 90,000 schools with the program, with the free program. And then you said that the second phase was to make sure that people were using the platform. What did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were all taken aback at how fast schools were signing up for this, and it was just completely surpassing our expectations. So we quickly said, "Wow, we've got to get some professional development out there. We've got to get some training out there." I mean, the product is itself is pretty intuitive, but this was all so new for everybody. I mean, folks were, that had not used really digital curriculum materials in any meaningful way were kind of thrust onto this teachers who hadn't really been exposed to these types of platforms had to get really comfortable with them really fast. The use case for teaching kids over Zoom and how to adapt your materials and your processes to do that, like none of this existed,
Hmm.
right? So we're providing this instructional content out there, but there isn't a lot of education on how to really use this in this brand new use case. We all think about hybrid learning today, and if we have kids at home, we know like what it feels like to have your kids in front of a Zoom. But in March, April, that was very, very new to everyone. It's still relatively new. So we had to get our people out there. And so what we had was, obviously all virtual. We held live sessions. We held sessions over weekends. We recorded training. We provided all the support for, some of our larger districts, especially our paying customers. We provided, one-to-one coaching for their instructional coaches and their teachers and administrators. So we basically deployed our entire professional development team on making sure that folks were getting the most value out of these materials as possible.
That was a pretty big commitment.
Huge commitment.
Yeah, yeah. And how did that go? I mean, was the adoption by the schools and the teachers, because you're mostly working with teachers, right? We're not talking about parents. We're talking about the teachers at the schools, right?
Precisely, burning. Yeah.
Okay.
So how did it go? I think one of the things that we were, one of the aha moments for me throughout this process was that we didn't just expose the market to our products and services, but we also exposed the market to our people. And at the
Right.
end of the day, when we talk about phase three, when we really started to shift to the selling conversation, one of the things that we heard a lot was, if Newsela was able to provide this level of support when I wasn't even paying them, I can't imagine the level of support that they're going to be able to provide us when we actually become a paying customer. So more so than exposing the market to the product, we exposed the market to our people, and that was a tremendous asset when we tried to return, when we made the shift to returning to those selling conversations.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I will tell you that as you said that, I actually got goosebumps when you were explaining that, Adriel, because it's such a testimony to the quality of the people and really the passion that they're sharing in delivering your platform, deploying your platform out to 90,000 schools across the US for free. Again, you lived and breathed this for months and months and months. For me and for the listener who's hearing this for the first time, it's awesome. This is an awesome story that I'm so thrilled to share with my listeners. So I do want to get to the third phase, which is starting the sales conversation. So we're going to do that. But first, we're going to pause briefly for a message from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Postal.io, a sales and marketing engagement platform that generates leads, increases sales, and improves customer retention. Postal allows you to automate and personalize your offline outreach to both existing customers and new prospects at scale. Learn how you can easily integrate direct mail, gifts, charitable donations, and even alcohol into your existing sales, marketing, and retention strategies. Visit postal.io today and request a demo so you can boost your pipeline and close more deals. Okay, Adriel, I'm dying to get to this part because you are a for-profit business. What you did at Newsela has just been so impressive, so giving to the community of educators, and you built some reputations. But then you had to really plan and think about how do you start those sales conversations. And I would imagine that even internally, as you were planning that you were really again planning like how do you do that, how do you start a sales conversation after giving this platform away for months?
Yeah, it's obviously a question that we debated for quite a bit. We weren't the only education technology company offering some level of their services away for free. Many of them were. I think what was unique about us is that there were no conditions, whether your schools were open or closed. There was no limits on the product. You had to use it as much as you want. All you had to do was ask for it. So I think that gave us a lot of credibility up front to make the return to the sales conversation easier,
Hmm.
is that folks felt that at the very beginning, they were truly supported. But that being said, the timing of returning to that sales conversation was of utmost importance, right? Because if you go too early, you could be seen as exploitive or trying to take advantage of an opportunity. But
Hmm.
if you wait too long to start that sales conversation, you could have the money being spent on competitors. You could have money being routed to other priorities. Like there's a danger on that side as well. So we had to really think very, very closely about how we timed this and ensure that our sellers were situationally aware when they were starting these sales conversations. So we came up with a list of micro and macro indicators that we would look for in each account to figure out whether that specific account or that group of accounts for us, that state, was ready for that sales conversation or not. So, for instance, from a macro perspective, we looked at things like, had state budgets been released? Have schools closed for the entire year? Have they basically called the year, or are they still holding in person sessions? Has the federal government provided any stimulus? Like those were the kinds of things that we're looking at from a macro perspective. And of
Okay.
course, from a micro perspective, like has the account asked about what happens on June 30th when, this free period is over? Can I keep it? And obviously, that's an indicator that you can start getting into a sales conversation. Is it
Hmm.
a customer that has a renewal that's coming up? Like there were about 10 different micro and macro indicators that we were looking at. And then we had it all tracked in the system. So we really enabled our sellers to track these things on a state by state and account by count level, so that on a weekly basis, we could look at it and say, okay, where are we seeing patterns? Where are we seeing patterns of people, number one, like as we're reaching back out for these sales conversations, actually taking a call? And then when they take that call, are they providing any of these indicators that they're ready for the sales conversation? And we would flag them all in the system so that we could find the patterns.
Okay. And so you said that you identified about 10 criteria. So is that what your team did, Adriel? At the marketing team level, you identified those 10 criteria. And where I'm going with the question, so let me just kind of unpack my question for you is how did marketing and sales collaborate on this? What role did your marketing team play, and how did you and sales collaborate?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bernie. So the collaboration was actually between marketing, the sales or the customer team, and product from the very first start of this. So those are the three legs of the stool. We were tied at the hip in every phase of the strategy, including the return to selling. So, in terms of the specifics around identifying the indicators, that was a marketing led initiative. We own the market intelligence, and we have the best insight into what's happening in terms of, for instance, stimulus funding and state budgets and things like that. Worked very, very closely with the sales teams to finalize that list. And then the sales operations team played a huge role in just kind of operationalizing the tracking of all of this. And then, of course, the field sellers, as that information was coming in, working with their leadership to adjust as we learned. And it was just every week, adjust, learn, adjust. Is this working? Is that message working? Adjust, learn, and optimize.
How did you keep your finger on the pulse of, like, on a day-to-day basis? I would think you were probably looking at this daily, right? How did you keep that finger on the pulse and really know what's working, what's not working?
Yeah, for sure. So we had it all tracked. I was really taken aback by how something that could arguably be such subjective measures, we were able to kind of add some quantifiable measures to our CRM to start to track these things. So we put in metrics like, for instance, what is the rate at which we've reached accounts and have they been responsive? So has they picked up our call? We had other metrics, like we created a metric called an all systems go metric, which basically was the account ready for a sales conversation based on the indicators we had outlined? It was all listed out. There were like check boxes in our CRM that folks could go through. And then we would look at patterns state by state, like, are we seeing trends that this state is doing, really, really well in terms of us reaching the accounts that we need to reach, and also them being open to a sales conversation, in which case you could say, okay, well, this state is ready for sales conversations. And we could probably be a little bit more, I wouldn't say aggressive, but a little bit more upfront with like returning to that sales
Sure,
conversation.
sure. Okay. All right. So, what can you speak to? Remember, this is a public podcast, right? People from around the world can listen to this, Adriel. What can you speak to in terms of some of the results that you saw from this initiative?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mentioned earlier that most education technology companies, 70% plus, provided some version of their products away for free during this
Hmm.
pandemic period. But not all of them saw an increase in paid subscribers. There was some early research that only about 25% of education technology companies that had provided free services actually saw an increase in paid subscribers. We were one of those companies that did, and the growth has been truly, truly remarkable, completely surpassing our expectations. I think our hypothesis that if we it was very validating, because we make a lot of decisions, or most of the decisions that we make in this company are all rooted in what is the right thing to do for our students and teachers. And in this case, our hypothesis was that the market was going to reward us if we did the right thing, and it did. We have conversations now with school districts that we had never, had an open door to in the past, and entire states that we really hadn't been able to get the level of traction that we would have expected in the past. And that's continued really through the end of the year.
Fantastic. So it's a great story. It's a great story, and I'm thrilled to share it. So, what I'd like to do now, Adriel, is shift over to the part of the podcast where I do kind of a recap, a summary of what we discussed. And then when I'm done with my recap, I'll ask you to just comment or add anything that maybe jog your memory on a point you want to make to just kind of wrap things up. We'll ask you for your digital contact information, and then we'll bring the podcast to a wrap.
Perfect.
So we began our conversation with your introduction to your company, Newsela. Fascinating company. You are basically a provider of instructional content for K through 12. You said mostly in the U.S. So you take content from around the web from reliable sources and you make it ready for the classroom. You've reached 35 million children and 2.5 million teachers, and you're rewriting the content at 5 different reading levels and providing instructional support for teachers, and really you're a company that's equal parts mission driven, always wanting to do the right thing for schools, teachers, students, but also for the business as well. You mentioned that the history of the company, the legacy is the CEO saying that the single bottom line is making education better for as many teachers and as many students as possible. And so that's an awesome mission, and when you can do that for a profit, I mean, that's just, it's win-win all the way around. And then we, of course, talked about this year, 2020, and how you opened the year by sort of a strategy of going from one product to 4 products. And then in March, when the world changed, you said, okay, we've got to, do something. And you looked around the marketplace and you said, okay, education is basically closing around the US. And so as we look at our stakeholders, education administrators, students, teachers, and investors, which includes Newsela, what can we do that is a mix of doing the right thing that's also good for the business? So you all made the decision to make your platform free for students and teachers that are closed with no conditions, no strings, just ask. And you said that about 70% of ed tech companies actually did something similar, but only 25% saw an increase in revenue. So you talked about a 3-phase program. The first phase being, making the decision and really making the product ready for to give it away for free, and then getting the word out and making sure that people knew about it. You moved very, very quickly. You got the word out through communication from the CEO, social media, and within a week, you had 15,000 signed up, and you reached a total of 90,000 schools signed up, which is 2/3 of the students in the U.S., which is just amazing. And then the second phase was just really getting the schools to adopt and use the platform. You mentioned, Adriel, that a lot of teachers really didn't know, they didn't have experience using a virtual classroom. So you really deployed your full resources to your professional resources team to really help the teachers deploy the platform, use the platform, and that really enabled them to see and learn exactly how to use your platform. And it really also gave them the opportunity to experience your people firsthand. And then the third phase was starting the conversation. And one thing that I really made note of is you talked a lot about the timing. You didn't want to start too early because that could be perceived as exploitive, but you also didn't want to do it too late because you might miss out on budget opportunities. So your marketing team was a marketing led initiative. You identified 10 criteria to start sales conversations, and you identified those criteria across macro and micro. You said macro are things like when states have released budget, if schools are still open or closed, how much states maybe receive federal budget allocation. And then micro would be things like if an administrator starts asking about expiration or pricing, or maybe there's a renewal scenario in place, and then you tracked all that in your CRM and you're looking for patterns and really collaborating between yourselves, marketing, sales, and sales operations, and then, of course, product. You mentioned you're using CRM to track things like the rate of account and what you called an all systems go metric, so that you can really maximize the sales potential, but again, doing it with the right timing. And then you said that The growth that you experienced from this program has surpassed your expectations. And I think my favorite point, Adriel, is that you validated your hypothesis. And that hypothesis was that, due to the pandemic, you decided to do the right thing and that you went into it with the hypothesis that the marketplace would reward you by doing the right thing. And consequently, as you said, your growth has surpassed your expectations. You're now into entire states and school districts that you said you have not been in previously. So that's part of the reward. And I'm sure that, you can't get more granular than that. And we certainly understand. But I think that alone is just a great testimony to the success of the program. So, Adriel, I'll leave my summary there. Is there anything that you would like to add?
That's a perfect recap. I think that's exceptional. I
All
would
right.
not add anything.
All right. Fantastic. Well, Adriel, I want to make sure that my listener knows how to connect with you online. So, why don't you share your LinkedIn URL so that my listener can connect with you online?
Sure. You can just find me on LinkedIn at Adriel, and that's Adriel Sanchez at Newsela. So you should be able to find me pretty easily that way.
Fantastic. And Newsela is spelled Nusela. Did I get that right?
NEW, like news.
NEWS. Okay.
Yes, ELA.
I meant to say that, but I blew it.
It's
We're going to
okay.
leave that in because that's part of the podcasting magic.
Okay.
Adriel, I just want to thank you first of all for what you did and what you're doing for the education marketplace, and for taking the time to share that story with me and my listener here on this episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bernie.
Hey, don't forget to visit postal.io to learn how you can integrate direct mail and gifting into your existing strategy. Postal.io is a sales and marketing engagement platform that generates leads, increases sales, and improves customer retention. Hey, that's a wrap for this episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. Hey, if you're not subscribed, I invite you to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player so that you don't miss a single episode. And I'd love it if you give the Modern Marketing Engine podcast a rating or review in Apple Podcasts. That really helps others to discover it. We publish a show notes page for each episode with links to the resources that were mentioned during the conversation. Just go to vengreso.com and navigate to the podcast menu. And while you're there, be sure to check out our Modern Selling podcast hosted by Vengreso's CEO, Mario Martinez Jr. Hey, are you following the Modern Marketing Engine podcast on the socials? We're active on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and on YouTube. In fact, we publish each episode on YouTube for those who listen to audio content on YouTube. Hey, one last thing. If you and I are not connected on LinkedIn, I invite you to send me a personal invitation to connect. Now, please be sure to say that you're a listener of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. If you don't include a personal note, I have no way of knowing that that's how you found me. Hey, until next time, I wish you continued success on your modern marketing journey.